Um, Hi guys, this is JFish for DeucesCracked.com, and this is going to be my first video for tabling 3.6. I'm on some waitlists for some more tables, so hopefully we can get a fourth up. This guy seems like a pretty aggressive short stacker, so hopefully he wins since those guys are never really that good. It's always kind of important, I feel, to distinguish between the pro rat holers and the and just the amateur short stackers, because these guys are actually very profitable. Okay, so pretty weak passive player limps, and like an 18-13 tag limps behind. So definitely going to complete pretty much any two suited cards or anything remotely connected. And with bottom two here, it's just better to lead pot. This guy definitely likes to call more than he likes to raise. I'd say he has something like a weak king most of the time here. Definitely going to fire out again. Here in this limp pot, I like leading also. And on the river, when all the draws missed, and I don't really think he's calling me two streets with a draw there, it's possible. And I could check call the river, but versus this player, I think there's a little bit more value in betting. And I think he looks me up pretty light when all the draws miss. So, I mean, yeah, it's definitely possible he had a draw there. This guy, it seems like he doesn't really like to fold after he limps pre-flop. I have a full house, and just trying to wonder if I want to call this, because his line's kind of stupid. Queen 10 suited, button versus another gun open. It's definitely good enough to call. I don't really want to re-raise here because it's kind of too bluffy. I think this hand plays fine in position. You know what? I really don't think that's too bad of a call. Yeah, like, he's an idiot. When the pre-flop raiser checks on a flop like this, he's giving up the vast majority of the time. And I think I can get Jen off some hands anyway when I can bet the flop. So, pretty easy bet right there. A check call from the pre-flop raiser here, I would guess, is something like a weak jack or 10s or 9s or something. I would bet a couple turns. A 7 isn't a great turn to bet. I think I can still value bet a queen or a 10 pretty well. So I'll check behind here and see what he does on the river. Decent card to bluff at, but I feel like when people check call as pre-flop raiser, they definitely want to go to showdown a little bit more than they would otherwise. When he check calls and leads this river, I would guess, I don't know, maybe he has king jack or something like ace jack or something. But I don't think he's I don't think that's really that good of a spot to bluff. It would be interesting if I rivered a pair of kings to see what he did that with, but I would guess it's something like a pretty strong jack that's making a blocking bet there, or yeah, I don't think he would ever like turn 10s into a bluff or anything on the river with a line like that. In this limp pot here, we have bottom pair. Could definitely lead at it, but I think it'll go check, check, check enough that I can sometimes win it with a pair of 7s at showdown. So I think I'd rather just check fold there, because whenever I get called, I'm going to have near zero equity. One thing I was thinking about lately was that it's actually kind of interesting that when you can actually learn quite a bit about the fishier players from different countries. Like, I think a lot of the fishier players definitely adhere to some stereotypes that go country by country. Like, I feel like Canadians are a bit weak tight. Um, Italians and Russians are just like absolutely crazy. This guy really doesn't give me that much credit here. So I think I can definitely play a suited ace pretty profitably in position versus him. I believe he's from Russia. The kind of annoying thing about Camtasia is it kind of prevents the mouse overs, so I can't see people's locations. We get squeezed by a short stack guy, and I don't really think these guys ever do this too light, especially considering it's under the gun button here, so pretty easy fold. We have aces, big blind versus the MP open. Pretty easy re-raise. And he insta 4 bets, so we'll insta 5 bet. And always a preemptive reload. And I really do like taking notes. I feel like it's just a lot better than the alternative not taking notes, because it's so easy to forget things in a week from now, or even a month from now, or 2 months from now, and it's so nice to have notes whenever you have a real tough decision. All right, so we have this kind of weak, I'd say passive, and definitely leans toward calling. So we're gonna make a bet here. If he calls, I would definitely put him on an ace or king, and my bluff frequency on the turn river is going to be pretty low versus a player like that, since I rarely think I'm going to be able to move him off top pair, and a pair of kings might be like pulling teeth. You might notice I took a tiny bit to raise there. I always try to look at the stack sizes of everybody behind me to kind of figure out what kind of situations I'm going to be dealing with. Like I said, this guy doesn't give me much credit. I'm gonna see about this. If he raises, I will 3-bet, because I feel like a hand like this plays a lot better when you 3-bet rather than calling and trying to check raise turns, and it's kind of easier to balance with bluffs too. Like I said, he really doesn't give me much credit, and he does raise my my c-bets quite liberally. So I'd like to make a re-raise size that I'm kind of comfortable going with. And he has actually a really big draw, so I think he's slightly ahead. But so it's kind of nice knowing the people who are playing that loose in position versus me, because I can put a little bit more pressure on their range when I know they're that weak at times. Like most of the time, with 4-3 suited, he's going to flop absolutely nothing and forced to give up. So he's also going to be forced to kind of bluff with it a fair amount post flop. And this player definitely will bluff with it a fair amount post flop. I'd say that was a pretty standard hand, though. He definitely played it well by raising the flop. This player looks pretty splashy, and I could definitely get ace-jack in pre-flop versus him. But, I think I'm just going to call and play any top pairs and nuts. So I squeezed ace-king suited here, and this guy cold called. He has less than half pot left. Pretty easy time to put him in. And he actually has put his money in a really good situation there, but given the stack size of post flop, I feel like that's a pretty mandatory shove. I did fold sixes here versus this player's very small open from MP. I feel like those small opens are usually really weak, so I can't play too much for the set value of my hand. And since he's kind of short and I was timing out and had a decision on another table, I decided it was better to just fold. Both of these guys checked me. Not quite sure what his checking range here is, but I feel like was 70% better, so I just feel like a 70% bet is a lot better than checking in that situation. Since I will take it down a fair amount, I have the best hand a fair amount. If he check calls, I don't think I can be bluffing too much, since there aren't too many scare cards if he does have a mediocre hand like queens. I feel like even on an ace river, he's probably calling, and if he check calls, there's a decent chance he has something like ace queen, ace jack. So I think I'd pretty much just give up if he called, since I wouldn't be comfortable in in bluffing any specific cards. So, interesting to know this guy lives under the gun. He's definitely going to be one of the weaker players at this table. He's isolated by the Wet Bandit, who I don't have great reads on, but he seems to be a pretty aggressive tag. I assume he has a very wide isolating range. He definitely has a fair re-raising range in position too, so I'm not going to be able to open as many buttons as, say, if I had these two people to my left. Both of these players I assume are pretty passive. I know this guy's very passive, and I've never seen this guy before, and he just opened limps, so yeah, he's pretty passive too. So I would be able to open hands like 4-5 off, 9-4 suited, hands that I probably would fold versus a tougher lineup. I think 3-4 off is probably just time too weak for me to wanna complete there. I mean, it's certainly not a bad thing, especially considering there's a limper there. It's gonna be pretty profitable to complete a huge range, but it is a small blind, and playing a really shitty offsuit connector in the small blind kind of sucks. If there's a player who gave me more credit or something, I might open 7-10 off, just for the fact that I'd be taking it down a lot pre-flop. But this guy's definitely going to call me really wide, and I think that's going to be a clear mistake to open 10-7 there. And I would be isolating very wide here, and this is actually not even that bad of a hand ISO considering the blinds are pretty passive. But I just rather not. I've had phases where I just pretty much isolated any two cards, and it gets expensive. King 10 off I might raise here. The small blind doesn't appear to be raising too much or anything, so it's not a bad open. 6-5 suited plays pretty well in position, and it's first round gun open, so I'd hate to get 4-bet here. So definitely just going to flatten the cutoff. We flop middle pair and a couple decent backdoor outs. So we're definitely going to peel one. One thing I like to do before making any decision really is just taking a bunch of time. So even if it doesn't appear like it's a tough decision, it makes the other person think that it doesn't. I don't give away anything by insta calling. Is pretty much what I'm trying to say. And we turn one of our backdoor flush outs, and got a peel again. It's a decent 2-barrel card. Chance we're good. Unlikely that we're good, I'd say. But we do have enough equity to call, and we have position, so we can definitely put a bet on the river if we improve. I don't think this is too good of a board to bet, even though it does look really strong if we bet, since we're kind of repping 6s full and that's it. So I'm just going to check. And he was 2-barreling with 2s. So it seems like a pretty decent play by him. the board changed queen and jack, so pocket pairs like 10s, 9s, 8s should fold to a 2-barrel on the turn. So I actually quite like his play. It's funny, but I think that it's almost a standard play at this point. We have this guy 3-betting me. Kind of tempting to call because I feel like King Jack plays pretty well versus his 3-betting range, since it's going to be very wide, and I did just stack him on the other table, so maybe he's a little bit tilted and will spew more than usual. I always like to write down the positions and pretty much exactly how the hand went whenever I take notes, because it's pretty hard to misconstrue something when you're just writing exactly what happened. So okay, we're definitely pegging this guy as a pretty aggressive tag. His cutoff open range is going to be pretty wide. Ace 3 off with this lineup. This guy just re-raised me a couple hands ago, and Ace 3 isn't necessarily the type of hand I want to be opening on the button with 100% frequency, so if I'm going to fold it, I think that's a decent spot to fold it. If I'm going to be folding it sometime anyway. And with a kind of aggressive dynamic, though he hasn't really seen any aggression from me, though I'm sure he knows I am somewhat aggressive. Okay, so we flop a very strong hand here. Not only won't we be able to fold this, I don't ever want to fold this. I like making my c-bets in re-raise pots pretty small. There's no reason to be betting a lot, especially if you do re-raise a lot. And it's interesting to note he did fold, so I think he would call jacks, 10s, 9s for one bet. So he's probably calling my re-raises somewhat speculatively there, since the only premium hand that he folds pretty quickly on that flop is ace king, and most people don't even give up ace king with that much of a fight these days. So I'd say it's definitely possible that he's calling my 3-bets with suited connectors in position, which means I'll be a little bit more comfortable in c-betting and re-raise pots versus him, since he's going to have something a little less often. Decent spot to open a 4x, but I don't want to start inflating these pots too much. This is a very aggressive regular, and we are deep, so I don't want to let him utilize his post-flop edge too much. We flop top pair, no kicker on a monotone board, bet and an insta-fold. Had he raised on that flop, I think I would have just folded. Our equity really isn't that high. I mean, even if he has like one heart, he's going to have 30% equity, so going to fold 4-6 here. So, and he's rarely going to be bluffing without a heart. And one of the best outcomes that's going to be is for us to call the raise, and it to go check, 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 check. Which, I mean, whenever you're hoping for that outcome, it's kind of a stretch, especially when there's 2 streets left to play. Okay, we flop a pretty hidden draw on a great board to c-bet. So we are just going to take a little bit of time to c-bet. I know the big blind here is pretty aggressive, but I like to keep up the aggression at the beginning of matches and adjust if they are playing back. Um, I think I'm gonna bet here again. I think he's gonna have something like a mid pair here a lot that is gonna be pretty much forced to fold to a bet. And this is an open for me a lot of the time, but whenever there's a good aggressive player and I'm deep with right behind me, I feel like it's just way too easy for them to turn a profit by re-raising you there. So I kind of like to minimize the extent to which I'm able to be exploited. Ace Queen suited in position versus this guy's open. Not, I would say, a standard re-raise. I re-raise this some percentage of the time. Not a lot. So you did this really quickly. Definitely gonna be thinking about it with Ace Queen. He's definitely pretty aggressive. He's seen me raise twice now, and it really feels like a spot where he definitely can open up his 4-betting range quite a bit here, especially as a bluff, so I think it's a good spot to 5-bet shove. The only hand we do poorly against is Ace King, and if he has a bluff range here at all, it's going to show a pretty decent profit, since we have roughly 35% equity versus most 4-bet ranges I would say he has, and when he tanks here I would say he's folding nearly always. So, pretty nice play there. So, just make the note and kind of carry on. Versus players like this, I feel like that's a pretty spewy play, considering I just 3-bet him once before, maybe an orbit or two ago, and he and I have actually never played before, unless he was on a different screen name or something. So it seems pretty premature to me. Despite the fact that I was on the button, it was an MP open, and I would say he has about 15% opening range there. So I'm not going to be able to 3-bet, absolute trash. It's just going to be a bunch of like pseudo connectors and pretty decent hands. And if I'm 5-betting Ace Queen, his move really cannot be that profitable. I think I'm just going to check here based on his stack size, but I would isolate there a lot because it's a pretty good hand to be aggressive with out of position, since it's easy to push lots of draws. Here we get squeezed by aggressive player. Can't really 4-bet here or anything, so standard fold. Okay, nice situation here. We open Ace King pre-flop, get called by kind of a station. Flop essentially the nuts. So we're just gonna try and bet and get some value from our hand. Alright. Not a great flop to continue with, but I feel like our ace and king are probably outs if we get called. So I think it's an okay spot to bet. Okay spot to check fold too, but I would only check fold if I had a little bit more history with this guy being real aggressive. And I'm running pretty good here with lots of big hands. So just going to kind of slow down the action a bit, just so I always like slowing down the action. I feel like I play a lot better when things are going at the pace I like them to be going at. So even if I'm getting a lot of hands and betting a lot, I like to have lots of timing breaks, even if that doesn't really make sense. I feel like I can control the flow a little bit better when everything's not too fast. No reads on this player, but King Jack off is going to be pretty much the best hand I fold here, since I would never call. So I think it's a pretty decent hand to 3-bet, because it plays okay in 3-bet pots should he just call. And it kind of removes some possibilities of kings, ace king, that actually does kind of matter, including jacks. So even though I'm kind of throwing away all the value of King Jack off, so to speak, in this situation, I would have folded anyway. So if you think about it, I'm actually getting more value than there was before, rather than sacrificing some. And yeah, I could call, but I just don't think that's a good strategy. Aggressive player here. I think this is a great spot to call with 4-5, considering how he's playing and probably how he thinks I'm playing. Gonna be playing my bigger hands pretty fast with a hand like this, and having position is great. Once he checks, I think he could check raise a small percentage of the time, but I think he's giving up here the large majority. So I'd like to be able to bet here with a pretty wide range, and when he checks, I'd like to be a bit more sure of his ranges. Him check calling is awkward. He did this again in the other hand, if I recall correctly. So he seems to be doing this pretty often. So I'm definitely gonna make a note and give up here. Alright, so it's kind of nice to know that he does turn his hands face up from time to time, which should make things pretty nice and easy. Here, once the ISO raise is already so big, I just raise pot. I don't think there's any real reason to re-raise more than pot with any of your hands here. It's possible to even re-raise less than pot because it's over 1/6 of your stack at that point. Versus short stack cutoff open, I'm just going to try and re-raise and get jacks in pre-flop. Should he call, I probably won't be folding this hand on any point. Maybe on like ace king queen flops, but even ace high flops, king high flops, queen high flops, I'll probably just check call. That's kind of a bad flop, speaking of them. But this is a spot where I don't really think there's any value in betting. If stacks are going to be going in good, which is kind of a stretch. At the start, it's going to be if I check call. He insta-pots it after I take some time to check. I think this is a board I'd fold on. If it was like king 8-4 and I checked and he potted it, I certainly would not fold. Once again, this is an open. I definitely make some of the time, but we have an aggressive small blind, a big blind I just re-raised, so he's kind of prone to play back at me with a slightly higher percent for sure, and a player who is pretty aggressive. I've played him. I feel like I think he's aggressive because I played him a bunch heads up, and I thought he was kind of crazy there. But that is just a guess. I haven't played with some of these players in a couple months, mostly because I've been trying out different sites. But I think I kind of just like full tilt more. There's a lot of players I'm going to be re-raising a very large percentage of my hands here from the button to their cutoff open, but 9-5 off is one of them. 9-5 suited probably would be if I even know just a little bit more about this player. I'm pretty much readless versus him now. Okay, we flop top pair here, standard c-bet. Pretty interesting spot. So we have less than a pot size bet here. If he can ever be bluffing, I feel like he's going to have a lot of equity with his overcard hands anyway. So if I'm going to be getting in it, I'd much rather get it on the flop than call and kind of reevaluate. Because if he bluffs, it becomes very plus EV for me. And if he ever does this with a worse hand for value, like eights or something, which I've definitely seen fish do, although it's certainly not going to be a likely outcome in this situation, I think it's better just getting it on the flop. And he was bluff raising, so definitely important to make a note. So there's this guy. I'll know I can play my kind of marginal hands like that with a bit more confidence. Versus some players, I could definitely find a case for playing a hand like 9-10 there a bit slowly, possibly even folding to the flop raise. In limp pots, I tend to play with the initiative a lot. I just tend to lead and try to take control, rather than doing too much tricky stuff. Though I do check raise, and I do have a check raise game in limp pots, but it's going to be less frequent than me just leading most of the time with my hands. Decent spot to squeeze here, but I did just re-raise him that time before, so I think I'm going to take the nitty move and fold. Okay, so his sixes versus cutoff open, and he has less than 75 big blinds to start. I feel like this player is kind of weak, and I'm going to be able to call sixes for a bit more value versus a player like this. Depending on when he bets, I'll choose my action here. I can definitely check fold to a flop bet, because even a hand like King Queen has significant counterfeit equity versus me. So had he potted it or something, I probably would have just check folded. When he checks behind the flop, calls a turn, and then an ace river hits, especially when backdoor clubs also hit, I think this is a very, very, very easy check fold. This guy min re-raised me, which I assume would be a misclick, so pretty much calling any two there. And flop, very hidden hand. So let's see what to do in a second. Definitely overcalling twos in this situation. Gonna make it 145 here, because I feel like this looks pretty bluffy, and he can definitely rebluff this. Okay. Pretty close spot here, but out of position, I'd rather just fold 8-6 suited there. Because I feel like when I complete and then call again, my hand is kind of identified as some sort of, some sort of suited connector, low pocket pair. And if I put in a lot of action post flop, it's just going to be hard to draw to the type of hands that 8-6 suited makes when you're going to be out of position in a spot where if you show aggression, it's going to be very obvious. Yeah, this guy just bluff raised me the last flop, and now open shoves here. I think ace queen is a pretty easy call. Ah, damn it, he's free rolling me now. So, this guy is a bit insane. I feel like I would call in that situation with nines plus ace queen plus. Though, the cutoff hands like ace jack and eights are definitely pretty close there. though I think it is better to fold since his shove size is significant. Like, this is a hand I'll open with even with an aggressive deep stack behind me, because I feel like this type of hand plays pretty well, even when out of position. And this is not a flop where he's going to be floating me too much. Alright, so I turn Jin. This guy definitely seems to be very active here, but got full twos. I think betting's better here. So I'm about 117. Pretty dry board here. He's not really going to call unless he has a pocket pair or a jack. So I think it's worth c-betting just so that you don't check fold. Like, I think in poker there's going to be lots of compromises where you're going to have to take the second best option just because it's worse than the third best option, you know. And this guy tanks for a bit and folds, so I'm guessing he folds something like ace-10. And this guy bets pretty quickly when check too. Very easy fold, though I just do like taking some time. Small blind completion can be a very weak hand a lot of the time, and even if it isn't, when you're in the big blind versus small blind and they're too loose, it's just one of the most simple situations to turn a profit. Like that very situation pretty much explains why having position is awesome and not having position sucks so much. Because once they open complete, you know, it's just so easy to just tear them apart. Ace King does become a lot tougher to play when you are deep, though. Like, should he 3-bet me here? I definitely would not 4-bet. I feel like I would fold out a lot of the hands that I dominate when he does 3-bet, and I do get to play 3-bet pot, albeit out of position. So I'm going to be flopping lots of better mate hands versus him. And his 5-betting range at 200 BB deep is going to be pretty strong, and I'm not going to have the 44-45% equity that Ace King has versus 100 BB shoving range. This guy's pretty loose and passive. Even though he's short, I don't want to get 9s in pre-flop here. I think I'm just going to call him, see a safe flop. And he continue bets on ace queen 7. Reasonable to peel this, but I feel like this guy's gonna be a bit spazzy and spewy, and I can't comfortably call flop to full turn because I feel like he can definitely do something stupid like bet 1/3 pot again with bottom pair, just putting me in an annoying spot. So if I'm gonna fold anywhere, I think it's better just to fold the flop and pot's real small. And I keep talking about this guy like he's real aggressive, but he seems to be very tight and in line. Maybe he's just as petard in heads up. I know that's definitely the case for some people. But he seems to be playing very solid and well here today, so it's kind of nice that I didn't over-adjust earlier. So should he erase me or something now, I'd probably give him a lot more credit. That's a very bad shove. Wow, that's definitely something to make a note of, you know. Yeah, that's like just as I was saying that he's very solid. He goes ahead and makes a very donkey play where he opens button with 8s, gets 3-bet by the by this guy, the fairly aggressive Russian. Um, he flats in position, and then he shoves over c-bet on a 10-3-5 rainbow flop. This is a spot where shoving eights is likely profitable just because this person will have no pair enough, but it's just suboptimal. When you're called, he's gonna have 5% equity for the rest of his stack, which is a significant loss. This player definitely likes to raise my c-bets a lot, and I hate taking weak lines with marginal hands out of position, but I feel like he's been betting this flop a ton of the time when I check, and this kind of keeps the pot at a size that I'm more comfortable with a hand like this. I will mix it up and take this line with top pair and stuff. That's a great turn. Probably calling two barrels even if I didn't hit a club, depending on the card though. So I think my hand looks like 9s, 8s, something like that. If he bet the river, I'd be really inclined to call, since his story kind of adds up to only a few hands, like Queen X. A good 10. And that's really not that many hands on a board like that, where he can definitely be two-barreling lots of draws. I think I'm gonna flat behind with 5-3 here. I don't really want to squeeze it. I think I can play a pot pretty profitably with this semi-unknown here. It kind of sucks that this guy decides to squeeze, but I think calling is slightly better than re-raising there. So we have very small showdown value here. Kind of unlikely we get check raised by anybody, but it's definitely possible we do by by the short stack at least. So I think I'm just gonna check behind it and see what happens. We have a pretty aggressive history versus this guy. He's definitely gonna have the capability to raise c-bets light, but he's gotten stacked a couple times, so I think he's gonna be slowing down at least a little bit. And fold here. We have solid pair outs on the turn and a backdoor flush draw, but three ways being completely out of position, I think it's better just check fold. I think In Memoriam's gonna have a pocket pair or a suit connector nearly always that I can push him off on lots of turns and rivers. Should he check call the flop? Decent turn to barrel, but when both of them check behind, I think one of them is going to have an ace fair amount too. And seriously, like having no chance of taking the button in the hand, I think is enough of a negative that I can comfortably give up with Queen 10 suited here a fair amount of the time. I've definitely seen bet this some of the time, but when the ranges are kind of weighted toward pocket pairs and hands that kind of connect with this flop, forcing me to fire more than one barrel a lot, that's a very, very strong move. I would say this guy has diamonds. I would say that's a good play with diamonds, and his value range is going to be like ace with at least top and bottom, like at the very, very least, and usually much better than that. So his value range there is very strong, but if he played diamonds like that, I like his play. Decent spot to open. Button's not too aggressive, so I'm gonna be able to have position in this hand a lot, even though it's kind of two aggressive players in the blinds. And because the big blind is so weak, I will be opening my button range here a little bit too. Though it does kind of suck that this guy is going to be lowering my profitability by re-raising a fair amount. But the nice thing of these stacks is these are awesome stacks to 4-bet, since it just puts so much pressure. A 5-bet is so much more committing for them, so their range is going to tighten up, and it still has pretty much the same equity, since, I mean, the same, what was I going to say? I was going to say, like, sometimes I find it hard to put thoughts into words, but at these stacks, when I open, he's going to be able to 3-bet pretty wide, because he's trying to make stack sizes shorter, because he's out of position, to kind of negate my positional advantage over hand when I have the button. So because his 3-bet range is going to be pretty wide, I'm going to be able to 4-bet, and he can't really 5-bet weak because he's going to be risking way too much in order to win the 4-bet. This guy seems somewhat aggressive. He's opening a couple hands. 8-7 off in position is definitely a call. We flop top 2 on a not that great board. He checks. We're definitely betting this. Probably betting this with any 2 cards. Like, even if we had a very bad pair and a straight draw, like 6-5 or something, which it's kind of nice to check behind, I would still bet it and probably just fold to a raise. If you check raise this, that's kind of interesting. Probably just going 3 bets. And he tanks and folds, which is, I don't know what that means. It means different things from different players. And like I said, I will complete pretty wide here, but not 10-6 off. Like, going back to the proposed 4-bet hand that never happened. Say he does 3-bet a hand like 10s. Maybe 9s is a better example, because I don't think he would fold 10s pre-flop. Say 3-bets a hand like 9s, which is going to be insanely ahead of my button open range. And it's a decent play, though I think that those stacks is probably better just to call. So say he does 3-bet 9s, and I 4-bet. If he has to fold even 9s there, that's just a huge percent of his re-raising range, because I'm sure he's raising 9s. That it just becomes like automatically profitable to do it with any 2 cards. Like I can 4-bet 9-2 suited there, and it should show an immediate profit, I think. I like isolating a bit more out of position, even if they're short, so I make it 5 BB. And this guy cold calls, so I would say he has something pretty decent, but not that decent. I'm definitely going to re-raise here. And if he shoves, you know, man, if he shoves, they're so sick. So I'm gonna 4-bet here. I'm gonna make it, I think 245. And should he fold, I think I can. I mean, should he shove? I think I can fold to a shove, to be honest, because I think it's a very decent play if he had aces too, kind of trap there. So this guy did limp raise aces, but it was such a short stack size that I'm pretty much never folding jacks. And this guy insta check behind, so I'm guessing he has 2 pair, something like that. It's kind of a pretty loose flop call, but probably a fair one. He's going to have a lot of equity versus my hand there, usually. This guy seems pretty weak and bad, so I'm going to be isolating him pretty weird, pretty wide. Alright. Definitely an aggressive 3-better, so we'll have to adjust my strategy a bit, but a hand like Queen Jack off, I feel like it's better pretty much to always open and nearly always fold to a re-raise. Pretty bad player here. I think I can play Ace Queen off profitably by flatting. I think I can keep a lot of his worst queens in and really get value from them. He's pretty passive though. If he bets, I'm going to check raise this flop. Small. And pretty much just put him on value town express. So I'm going to make it 3 times out of position. Just 3 times his raise. It looks pretty bluffy on a board like this. I don't think he's going to be folding too many one-pair hands to the check raise. And he insta shoves and I insta call. And unfortunately he has aces. But I like my play, so there really aren't too many hands that beat me there. There's kings, there's aces, and there's sets. So just kind of a cooler, even though this player is pretty tight. And especially when I just flat pre-flop, it keeps his range so much wider. So here we raise this player, I think for the second time. It makes a pretty quick call. This is a flop. Whenever you see a flop in a raised pot, kind of wonder if you'd rather bet it or check it with your air hands, and then kind of balance that with your big hands. Like if you're going to be checking, like say a 6, 7, 9 flush draw flop a lot, and the other person knows that, I'd also be check raising kings, because if they're you really don't want to let them have the ability to bet any flops with impunity. Pretty deep with this player, so we are going to be calling a suited connector. We would fold most of the time, and unfortunately we get squeezed, so we should fold. Whenever you kind of cold call pre-flop, you always have to be mindful of squeezes and realize that they will kind of lower the equity of your hand. So some hands that you might call might actually turn into a fold if there are very aggressive people behind you. But also, when there are very aggressive people behind you, you can exploit them in that you can kind of protect your calling range by occasionally calling behind with a hand like ace king, aces, or any hand that you're comfortable getting it in pre-flop, so that when they 3-bet, you can make what's called as a back raise and 4-bet, and it looks very, very unbelievable, and people usually respond by playing back pretty light to it, because back raising strong required that you had to have had this elaborate plan set up to kind of anticipate the squeeze, and that's kind of far-fetched for most people. So this guy seems to be playing to responding to my aggression, semi-aggression we'll say, by calling a lot, rather than kind of putting more pressure on me. And he seems to be playing pretty straightforward post-flop too. Like he didn't really think about it too hard on the 7-3 hand to fold. So we check flats, and pretty bad turn. Not because I'm so afraid of Queen Jack or anything, but because this hand is going to make it a lot tougher for me to get paid off by hands that would otherwise have called down. So that's why I made my turn bet a little bit smaller than I would have otherwise, because I'm definitely trying to encourage a call. And I think he thinks his hand looks really weak here, so he's planning on calling like any river bet. So I'm going to be betting pretty big here, because his hand looks like king queen or something. And I think he knows I know that. Okay, he actually had ace jack, so he checked flat at the flop with a gutter, and and then played his hand pretty well. Like, his hand is such at the top of his range that, to be honest, I might value at worst, though I probably wouldn't. I think 10s here, even though it's kind of a marginal hand. Last time I check called with a marginal hand versus this player. It's nearly always better to just to bet fold the flop. Interesting turn. I'm gonna check and reevaluate. I think he would always bet his draws on the turn, which is why I regret letting him have the initiative here. I think I'm gonna flat one and see what he does on the river. On a river like that, I think, yeah, I just think his turn betting range is so wide, and I feel like I just get myself in too many sticky spots. Should I just bet the turn and try to just take it down? I feel like that might be the easier option, but it's definitely not the more plus EV option. When this person leads into two people on the turn, I think he pretty much always has an ace. So while, yeah, I did kind of check behind to maybe get value later, there are pretty much zero semi-bluffs there except for 5-6, which is a double gutter. So I think I'm going to give him credit for a made hand. And he had an ace. And this guy also had an ace, so. Ha, you didn't even get my C-bet. Okay. Josh 3-6 is another tag who doesn't really like to fold. He seems to be pretty good. I definitely tried to run a couple big bluffs first in the past, though nothing real recent. And he's definitely erred, I guess, toward calling them. And he's owned me a couple of times in the past, and I've owned him a couple times in the past, so I'm not quite sure what he thinks about me. I mean, like everybody, he probably thinks every other tag sucks. Pretty bad game here, but I'll continue to sit. Sevens is one of the hands I'll pretty much never re-raise. It's just like too perfectly in my in my marginal hand range that I would always pretty much call here. Great flop. I don't think he can fold an ace at any point. Just kind of try and build it kind of fast. Definitely looks like I can be bluffing here. And he insta 3-bets. And and as you notice, I did just min raise it back to him, but that's because I thought his range there was like a bluff or hand he was going to stack off with, and if he was going to stack off with something, I didn't want to ever have the situation that that I call the 3-bet, turn goes check, and I'm forced to open shove, or check the river and hope he shoves. So instead of ever encountering that situation, I decided to just min raise, because then it looks like I can possibly be bluffing, and while not likely, it's possible that he does rebluff, which I think is just a better strategy than calling and hoping for him to bluff it off, because it allows us to maintain the initiative, and when we have the initiative, our ranges look wider. Okay, so here we check behind the flop, and then we bet 2 streets for value with Queen Jack there. So this I'm raising guy seems to be playing terribly now. Just way too aggressive with his marginal hands. So 3-handed. So now that I know what kind of hands he's doing his moves with, he seems to be pretty much turning all his marginal hands into hands that he is very aggressive with, which, in my opinion, is a very, very poor strategy. Okay, so Josh here opens. He opens 3BB, which I think versus me is a mistake. I think it's just going to be way too easy for me to turn so many hands into a profit there. And I'm running really good this session. Okay. And here when I raise, I'm not really thinking about building a pot, but it's a situation that's going to occur so frequently that I just want to kind of standardize my raise sizes. I think about 3.5 times is about right there. So I just want to make sure every single time I'll be raising the same amount. And here's 2 overs and a flush draw and a hold. The most important thing with notes is just to make sure that your shorthand makes sense to you. Like, I'm not going to give tips on how I take notes because everybody's individual situation. Everybody should kind of figure out what they want from their notes and what they'd like to remember. When I take notes, I pretty much just write exactly hands that happened, and I only take notes on hands that went to showdown, so I know what people had. I know some people try to take notes like just remembering lines, so if somebody took kind of fishy line, they'll just put that in their notes, but it really doesn't help you at all if you know that somebody took a line but have no idea what they did it with. And I feel like that's just kind of cluttered in your notes database, which is going to be pretty big pretty quickly anyway. Queen 5 off. It would require really weak competition for me to ever raise that on the button. It's just a hand that has no value at all, no pair value at all. Like, you're never going to be able to get any value bets really with a one pair hand, or at least not multiple streets of value bets, and that's a pretty significant downside to a hand. Great flop to see bet here because he's going to have no pair, no draw so often. Here, this player is kind of weak, so we are going to see bet this a flop, but we definitely check fold a fair amount versus tougher players. But because we have 2 solid backdoor draws, or we have, I guess we have 2 backdoor draws, but we have backdoor diamonds and 2 overcards, I think it's better to bet. And here we turn top pair. So we're going to continue to bet for kind of protection and for value. And when he insta-calls, I think always he has a worse hand. And it's definitely possible he has spades here. But he's going to have worse hands so often. And the thing to kind of wonder about when you bet here is, am I going to bet call if I bet something like 265? Or would I just call a shove anyway? And in spots where it's about a pot size bet, 360 to 410 in the stack, where I was going to call a shove anyway, I think I'm much rather just going to shove. Because it's very unlikely for him to have spades, and if I'm going to be bet calling, I'd much rather just always get full value when I'm ahead than if I'm going to be losing full value to every time I'm behind. And he actually had ace king for like an absolutely terribly played. I don't even know what to say about that. Here's a spot where I think it's pretty interesting. A short stack limps and we have a small pair on the button. This is a spot where we're going to be isolating so much if they have any kind of reasonable stack, but it's a decent spot to limp behind your real small pocket pairs and kind of lower suited connectors. Ace 6 suited, nice hand to 3-bet in position, pretty bad hand to 3-bet out of position, I would say. Both of them checked me. I pretty much think I'm never being able to fold a better hand. People like this definitely check raise and limp pots. So I think I'm just going to try to maneuver it to showdown with my under pair and very bad gut shot. Pretty loose open, but we shall see. If this Person is to 3-bet me. I think I would have 4-bet. Just because stacks are pretty good for 4-bets there. And it's super hard for him to continue without a very premium range. Okay, so I bet, and he snap calls. A couple different lines I can take in this situation. I can bet and check the river, but I think I'm just going to check to kind of make my checking ranges a bit stronger. Definitely calling that bet. And pretty good river. Just going to check and call any bet, really. That's losing so much value. Jesus Christ. I mean, it's not really important to get the hand right as long as the action makes sense with his hand and you pretty much understand the moral of that hand, which is that he's a very tight player who cannot value bet and slow plays pre-flop. Alright, so I'll probably go back and fix that hand sometime. Here's a hand where he's pretty much going to be always calling every worst pocket pair for 1-bet. So lots of value to be had by betting jacks there. And it's much better to bet jacks on the flop than check behind and then a Broadway falls, where it's going to be much harder to get value bets out of 7s, 6s. I think I'm gonna fold this just because I mean the person in the small blind who has a very short stack, I think weighs negatively enough to be out of position there that I think I just folded it. Oh well. Queen 7 suited is a hand I will open a lot versus weaker players, but I think this guy's pretty. I think he's tag if I recall correctly. So gonna try to cultivate a tight image so I can exploit that later. And I've been isolating and opening a lot on this table, so if I got 3-bet pretty soon, I wouldn't be too surprised. I'm gonna open. The fact that he has a little less than 30 VB or a little less than 33 VB is annoying, but I still think it's better to open here. And I'm just gonna see bet fold here. Camtage is being very annoying today. Always gonna be folding 10-5 suited, out of position deep there, versus a good player. Although he's not really a good player, but he's going to be aggressive enough that it's not really going to be profitable. We did just stack this guy a little bit ago. Haven't really been 3-betting much at this table at all, so I think we can definitely get a lot of credit here. In memoriam is very tight. I mean, not even tight. I just think he's nitty, and I think nitty goes way more than tight. And because he's nitty, I'm not really going to be making too many plays at him too light when he opens in one of the earlier positions. there was one hand where I opened the small blind with ace king, and he just shoved 100 BB in the BB in the big blind, and I pretty much snap called, but he had aces, and people who make those kind of plays with aces, I feel just have a very very nitty pay me off mentality. I'll try to be tricky, rather than ever really having bluffing ranges anyway. I mean, he also plays 18-13, so. Like from that hand, I wouldn't really gather that he's like a tight, tricky tag. I would just gather that he's like, this is so annoying. I can definitely 4-bet here to try to kind of isolate with dead money, but I'm just gonna fold. This guy's real tight. I think I do want to play pot with him for sure, so I'm just gonna flat jacks there and flop top set. I think I'm gonna lead, primarily because I think it's gonna go check 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 a lot, and I can definitely trap him with some bets. Should I give him a good price and lead here in his PFR? He insta calls. I think he'd probably raise queens plus, and if he didn't, he's always going to call off and stacking it off anyway. So I think I'm just going to continue to bet and kind of set up a reasonable river shove. Here I folded ace jack off versus an undergun open from the cutoff. I think that's pretty near standard. I would call there sometimes if the player was pretty weak or I knew him well. But versus unknowns, undergun open, not even coming close to closing the action or even having the button. If I had a backdoor flush draw here, I would definitely lead. As it is that I don't, I'd just rather not, because when I have a backdoor flush draw, there are just so many more turns I can just full pot if like I'm raising calls, forcing him to just like fold off a ton of his range when I pot. So backdoor draws definitely do matter in limp pots. If you're leading with a an air-like hand on the flop. Okay, we're deep with under the gun. This guy's pretty bad, so we're gonna overcall a suited ace here. I think that's a pretty standard call. But had under the gun open and it was fold to us, it'd be a pretty standard fold. So it's definitely important to be cognizant of like changing hand values. And here we do have some backdoor draws, but the board is just so dry that he's going to be able to check call us with so much that, and we're never really going to be able to hit backdoor draws enough to justify it. That I think it's better to just give up. We've been opening a bit too much, and queen 9 is a bit too weak. Okay. Wish I could see his location. This is so annoying. Okay, so we get check min raise on this flop. Not quite sure what it means, but I do know that it means we do have to call one bet to see what he does, because just for the sake of exploitability and not knowing him. And he insta jams, and this is a very easy fold. You could say the flop call the min raise slightly spewy, but I think the flop call is in itself worth it, just so that he knows in the future, in order to win the pot, he's going to have to fire that turn pot size bet. And when he knows that, his strategy is going to change. Like if he thought that he could just min raise the flop as a bluff, he's gonna kind of weight his flop min raise range to bluffs, which I would rather not have. I'd rather him playing straightforward with his big hand, so it's easier to read. So if he knows that I'm going to be calling that, then he knows that he can't just have a lot of bluffs in his flop min raising range. He's going to have a lot of strong hands too, because otherwise he's just going to have to min raise and fold to a float a lot of the time. Okay, so here we open aces, cut off for a small blind, short stack, pretty much the nuts on every street regardless of what falls. And here we're going to make a pretty big bet. even though we can commit him with less, but we really don't want to be check called here too much. If we can help it, we'd like to get the money in on the turn, rather than him calling the turn, a river falling, and us kind of reevaluating. So even though it's not really possible to commit him fully, I'm trying to commit him as much as possible. So I bet like 90% on that turn. But I think there are advantages to kind of being in calling station in some spots. Just so that it makes people play more predictably versus you in the future. And I think that information can sometimes be worth a lot. Another great spot to squeeze if this guy had a full sack. This guy open limps the button, so we shall isolate you. And he insta-folds. Queen 7 off, I think that's a bit too weak to complete after a limp or two. Great flop to lead here. We have bottom pair, which might be the best hand, and we have two pretty great backdoor draws, and also two pair outs and whatever. And we managed to take the button too, which is always nice. And versus a lot of players, I would not open a 7 off from the small blind here, but if it were folded to me, I do kind of want to play pots with this player, so I certainly would open it. Just because I feel I can play big pots with a 7, and I can control the pot size pretty effectively when I hit an ace. So it looks like in memoriam just raised and c-bet took down the last spot. Also a hand I might open with some frequency, but this guy's pretty aggressive, so definitely not going to be opening it. I think even basic decisions like pre-flop, whether or not to open a hand, you should kind of analyze it as much as you can. Like, find reasons to open a hand, find reasons not to open a hand. Don't really care about, whether or not you're too tight or too loose. Like, your tightness and looseness and your VIP and VPIP and your PFR should change pretty drastically from the different positions. Like under the gun, under the gun MP, it should be pretty tight. Cutoff should be a bit looser, and then button it should be really crazy. And then you should be pretty tight from out of position. So whatever that all adds up to, whether it be 20%, 25%, 30%, just make sure like your play is correct in all those spots rather than worrying about the overall VPIP, since it's almost meaningless. Okay. Decent hand, 3-bet. But I think I'd much rather just play with position on this player and kind of just chalk it up to variance if I get squeezed, rather than kind of protecting myself from a squeeze and just taking the aggressive play pre-flop. I think my hand has enough value that I'd kind of rather play a post-flop pot here. And the problem with 3-betting hands like King 10, although it's not a huge problem when you have position, is that you can definitely get into dominated spots, because they will be calling you with hands like King Queen, King Jack, Ace Jack kind of hands. Okay, so here we bet the turn with ace high for value, and we'll probably check call the river, since I think he could probably peel us with flush draws on a double paired board, and he rarely has better than ace high there too. So Jack is a pretty safe card to get another bet in on the river, should he bet.